For democratic and national security reasons, which are evident from the developments of recent years, and to safeguard, if possible, the secularity and religious neutrality of the state, we hereby read out the manifesto of the Kebec-Immigranistan Liberation Front in its entirety. Canadians and Quebecers, fellow immigrants, ladies and gentlemen. The Kebec-Immigranistan Liberation Front is not a modern-day Robin Hood, neither is it the immigrants' messiah, let alone a black liberation front. It is a group of lay immigrant workers from Quebec who have resolved to do their utmost to take charge of their destiny. The Kebec-Immigranistan Liberation Front seeks the total, equitable, and non-discriminatory integration of immigrants into Quebec. It also strives to have these people reunited in a free and secular society, purged forever of its gang of politicians, sovereigntist, and industrialist nationalists, set of people who have made immigration their private hunting ground for cheap labor and unscrupulously exploit immigrants to destabilize North America. The Kebec-Immigranistan Liberation Front is not an aggressive terrorist movement, rather a response to the terrorist aggression perpetrated by a tetra-nationalism terrorist, the Arab, the Sikh, the Hindu, and the Quebecer nationalism, which monopolizes political debate and has taken the entire Confederation hostage. The Kebec-Immigranistan Liberation Front is also the response to a scam of trafficking immigrants and the triangular trade of immigrant organized by the senior management and perpetrated through their puppets in the Canadian government offices, the province of Quebec, and the Immigrantistans. The Canada-Quebec Agreement on Immigration, the Immigration Act, the Permanent Residence Card, Social Insurance Card, the Refugee and Protected Person Status, Temporary Employment Agencies, Health Insurance, the Bouchard-Taylor Commission show on the unreasonable Islamic claims, and the guys from San Bernard-de-la-Cour. The Kebec-Immigranistan Liberation Front will be self-financed through voluntary contributions levied on companies that exploit immigrants, banks, urban taxi companies, temporary employment agencies, telemarketing, warehouses, manufacturing plants, farms, etc. The Kebec-Immigranistan Liberation Front strives for a normal immigration program, one devoid of hostilities and extreme sympathy and pity directed at immigrants. Quote, Jacques Parizeau on October 30, 1995, after Quebec's referendum on self-determination was defeated, "It's true that we were beaten basically by what? By money, then by ethnic votes essentially." End of quote. Subject to ethnic votes, the yes vote in support of Quebec's independence was outrightly rejected. We believed, for a while, that our ethnic vote had to be our electoral weight, our voices, and our demands, as Jacques Parizeau, a sovereigntist and former Prime Minister of Quebec, had put it. It should also be noted that the victory recorded by the No camp clearly demonstrates that the so-called sovereignty of Quebec is, in fact, and has always been, a conspiracy contrived by French-speaking Canadians to enslave poor immigrants. Quote, Diane Francis, a Canadian journalist and writer, "The Quebec separatism is not a struggle for self-determination. It is a racial conspiracy that has trampled on human rights, fair play, the economy of Quebec, and democracy. Separatists should be treated as the ruthless elite that they are. The separatists have cheated, lied, concealed facts, and rewritten history, have snatched the civil rights of Anglophones and Allophones for more than 3 decades, have purposely chased Anglophones out of Quebec, have enacted laws that legalize discrimination in employment and education." End of quote. The No camp's victory can be indubitably put as a triumph of rationality and an eternal covenant between immigrants and the unity of Canada. As a result, Quebec's sovereignty is well over, and the Kebec-Immigranistan Liberation Front will never let itself be distracted by the crumbs of social assistance and other social bananas that French-speaking sovereigntists and nationalist equalizationists throw into the backyard of immigrants every month. Numerous immigrants in Quebec now understand this and are ready to act. Federalists and lay immigrants in the coming years will grow up. 50,000 immigrants, Federalists, pacifists, and unarmed workers will obtain the right to vote each year in Quebec. Yes, there are reasons for the victory of lay immigrants and the consolidation of Canada's unity and security. Yes, there are reasons for poverty, unemployment, slums, and for the fact that you, Mrs. McHale Jean Deity of Montreal North, and you, Mr. Ramirez Villanueva of the city of Laval, who earn $15,000 a year, do not feel free in your host province of Quebec. Yes, there are reasons, and the welfare and unemployment insurance guys know them. Farm workers from Saint Hyacinthe, workers in the industrial zones of Longueuil and Saint-Laurent, and the bush clearers of the far north also know these reasons. Not forgetting the brave construction workers who we have tried to cheat once again also know these reasons. Yes, there are reasons why you, Mr. Tzegane Gitan from Penet Street, and you, Jean Zelay, who works at the factory in Saint-Jérôme, cannot afford to purchase golden boats with the fruits of your labor, as did Tony Accurso, the Quebecer whom the native Quebecers call an indictment. The Italian, the one who was so concerned about public procurement and social housing construction that he invited corrupt French-speaking political decision-makers to his yacht to hide their shenanigans from the view of poor immigrants. We are fed up with the ongoing corruption scandals, the links between the police and the mafia, and the illegal financing of political parties by private companies in exchange for public procurement contracts. It is known to all that when you want to stifle a case, you create a committee. We are fed up with the continuous establishment of investigative committees and the corrupt Permanent Anti-Corruption Unit, an establishment that arrests members of Parliament precipitously in violation of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. French is the native language of the devil and corruption. Father Chapdelaine was right when he said, quote, "Nothing changes in the land of Quebec. Generations follow one after the other. Political flaws remain. People come and go, but the corrupt systems remain the same." End quote. Yes, there are reasons why you, Mrs. Hima Halal of Sherbrooke, are not able to pay for trips to Morocco like all the corrupt judges, immigration commissioners, mayors, political leaders, members of parliament, and other shady business persons do with your money. The brave workers toiling at temporary employment agencies, the multinationals of slavery, know these reasons too. Workers who have not been given any reason to organize a union and made to pay millions of dollars in dues to unions they are neither acquainted with nor members of. Workers who have been concealed from the unclaimed holiday insurance contribution fees, the famous 4%, fees that are never returned to immigrant workers and will, instead, end up in the bank accounts of a handful of Quebec capitalists. The guys from the Quebec Labour Standards Commission and the government of Quebec are both well aware of this scam and these injustices, along with the motives behind it, which they so well encourage. Yes, there are reasons for you, Mr. Abdel Kourichi El Maroc of Jean Talon Street, and you, Akuna Matata of Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, to drown your despair, your rancor, and your rage in the beer of Quebec Liquor Company and the casinos of the Quebec Gaming Company. And you, Kaya Donovan from the Caribbean, with your legalized marijuana cigarettes. Yes, there are reasons why you, welfare recipients, are forced generation to generation to remain on social welfare. There are lots of reasons for these misconducts, which immigrant workers on farms, in warehouses, factories, know and are actively affected by them. The sons of second-generation immigrants are also familiar with them. Once assimilated, they will increase the number of Neo-Quebecers, beloved children of Bill 101, speak white, speak Quebecer, speak French, which is opposed to speak white, speak English, speak Canadian. Also, the officers of the Quebec Liberation Police Force, an organization that policed ethnic and social cleansing, should have understood these reasons, which are the arms and wings of the system. They should have realized that we were living in a terrorized society, because without their strength, without their violence, Nothing would have worked on August 10, 2008, the date of Freddie's death. We are fed up with the nationalist and independence claims of Quebec, as well as Hindu and Sikh nationalism and Arab nationalism and political Islam, which penalize immigrant workers to satisfy the ambitions of French-speaking Quebecers and the Islamic and Hindu-Sikh theocracy. Quote, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, former Prime Minister of Canada, making nationalism the rule for deciding policies and priorities is a sterile and retrograde choice. The overflowing of nationalism distorts our vision of reality, prevents problems from being posed at the true level, distorts the solutions envisaged, and constitutes a classic diversionary approach for politicians struggling with reality. End of quote. We are fed up with these Quebec's nationalist claims that keep the brave immigrants, medical doctors and jobs and taxi drivers and engineers as laborers in a state of slavery by shamefully protecting the exclusive monopoly of the disgusting professional order of Quebec physicians and that of Quebec engineers, which practices an insane policy of equivalence of diplomas by casting one by one in the street the most gifted immigrant engineers and physicians in favor of a handful of illiterate dropouts and baby boomers, ranking the Quebec nation among the world's intellectual minorities. We are fed up with these governments that grant ultra-special privileges and rights to a specific community of immigrants based on their religion and skin color, relegating most secular immigrants who, according to their arrangement, have no rights but the status of slaves. We are fed up with a government that denies xenophobia, racism, and slavery, but recognizes Islamophobia and Sikhophobia. Therefore, victims must be protected by parliamentary motions, official apology, and financial benefits that make Canada a multicultural Hindu, Islamic, and Sikh state. We are fed up with these governments that want to grant Muslims and Sikhs the status of nation or nationality, making them distinct peoples, distinct societies in the great Canadian and Quebec nation. This will inevitably lead to a total and irreversible Balkanization of Canada. Canada is neither the former Yugoslavia nor Bosnia and Herzegovina, let alone British India. Canada is Canada. Canada claims to be multicultural, so it reflects a father and mother with several children who differ from each other. Unfortunately, Canada prefers 4 of its children because they terrorize, hold hostage, intimidate, and manipulate the rest of the family. Who are these 4 children? The Arab, the Quebecer, the Indian practicing the Sikh and Hindu religions. We are fed up with this hypocritical society that relies on laws, a true symbol of the alienation of immigrants in Quebec, to keep the poor immigrants of Quebec fearful of the misery and unemployment to which we are so accustomed to. A state that apologizes too much, accuses itself to those who do not receive an official apology. The important thing is not the official apology tendered, but to forgive those who have offended us. We are fed up with the tax exemptions and our taxes that the Ottawa and Quebec City envoys want to give to American companies, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Uber, a ploy charged to encourage them, my brothers, to hire and invest in Quebec's beautiful province, where there is an abundant supply of cheap immigrants. Repeat after me. Cheap immigrant labor means low-cost labor. We are fed up with this government that abandons its paramount administrative duties, which are the protection of its economy, the interests of its farmers and its citizens during the negotiations of free trade agreements with the European Union, China, the U.S., and Mexico. It was predictable. Canada no longer has a foreign policy, but has an immigration policy instead. We are fed up with the empty promises of work, prosperity, and employment equity, but treated as hard-working servants and sycophants of the French-speaking nationalists, equalizationists, and white baby boomers. We are fed up with this society where claims for referendums on Quebec's independence alternate with referendums on Muslim cemeteries. We are fed up with this confederation where politics boils down to only 2 words, credit and carbon, When they seek to buy your votes and corrupt your consciences, they promise you the reimbursement of tax credits. On the other hand, when facing industrialists, they brandish the threat of carbon tax. We're fed up with these politicians who want to govern through scientific consensus and social acceptability. We are fed up with this hypocritical opposition between the left wing and the right wing. Some are racists and fascists, and others claim to be anti-racists and anti-fascists. Yet in truth, anti-racism is racism, and anti-fascism is fascism. The ends always end up converging. What you resist persists. This is the objective of those who call you to resist, to oppose. It's a secret of the universe, a secret of the law of attraction. The extreme sympathy and compassion of so-called anti-racists, anti-fascists, and other slaverists, immigrationists, and nationalists is a racist sentiment. Racism is an ideology that can lead to a systematic attitude of hostility or sympathy toward a category of people. There is just hypocritical racism on one side and complex-free racism on the other. Choosing between racists and anti-racists is like choosing between Ebola fever and AIDS. One kills instantly, and the other kills slowly. When hostility towards a group of people leads to discrimination, it is also possible for the sympathy of anti-racist activists to result in a form of self-discrimination and self-stigmatization, such as self-Islamophobia. In fact, that is the objective. Quote, René Lévesque, former Prime Minister of Quebec, Quebecers are a people of little faith, ambiguous, hesitant, and ambivalent. End of quote. We are fed up with these ambivalent, hesitant, and ambiguous governments that condemn their so-called radicalized citizens who want to travel and fight with the Islamic State in Syria and grant diplomatic immunity to those who return from Syria after fighting with the Islamic State. Quote, Hubert Aquin, writer and activist for the independence of Quebec, the defeat of the rebellion of the Patriots of 1837 to 1838 is the irrefutable proof that French Canadians are capable of anything, even fomenting their own defeat. End of quote. The failure of the Charter of Values and a real policy on secularism, or even on the religious neutrality of the state, are proof that the Quebecers are a hesitant, ambiguous, and ambivalent people of little faith, capable of anything, even to promote their defeat in the face of some courageous, reckless, decisive, and arrogant immigrants of too much faith of Allah, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, who proudly advance toward victory. Quote, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, President of Turkey, the mosques are our barracks, and the minarets are our bayonets, the domes our helmets, and the believers our soldiers. End of quote. We are fed up with the perpetual blackmail of a minority of whiner nationalists, master blackmailers and manipulators, Hindus, Sikhs, Arabs, and French Quebecers who have taken the entire Confederation hostage and want other citizens to disappear so that they can thrive. They must be silent so that they are the only ones with a monopoly on speech. They must die so that they have the right to live. They believe they are entitled to all rights and privileges, while others are entitled to nothing. Quote, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Quebecer will never achieve true greatness as long as its political classes are full of whining nationalists and master blackmailers. End of quote. As long as there are Hochelaga, Outremont, the administration of the Saint-Jacques Street, and all these true castles of high finance, we would not, like all of us immigrants know, have been able to drive them out by all means permitted by law, including peaceful, civil, and immobile disobedience. The great bosses of the economy and political realm will always be ready to do all the baseness to better deceive us. We live in a society of terrorized immigrant slaves, terrorized by big bosses and their many accomplices, mafia unions, mayors, and other corrupt nationalist politicians. Terrorized by the Roman pedophile church, even if its objectionable engagement is becoming less and less hidden. I mean, who are responsible for the murders and sexual assaults of indigenous children, if not these pedophile criminal French-speaker priests? Terrorized by radical pro-independence extremists? Terrorized by Khalistano-Sikh nationalism, Islamic Jihad, and radicalized Arab nationalist extremists? Who is responsible for the terrorist attacks targeted at immigrants? What about the anti-unbelievers terrorist attacks? Who blasted the Air India Flight 182? Quote, René Levesque, "We do not kill for any cause whatsoever, as long as we are free to promote it democratically." End of quote. We are increasingly terrified by the scholarship schemes and loan payments, both of which to be repaid to the governments of Quebec and Canada. Terrorized by the advertisement of the great masters of consumption, Amazon, Metro, Provigo, Dollarama, Walmart, Costco, Bell, TELUS, Rogers, Videotron, Quebecor, Air Canada, automobile manufacturers, and so on. Terrorized by the confined spaces of science, such as universities and colleges that deliver certificates of continuing education to immigrants who hold higher-level diplomas. Terrorized by the idea of having to suffer in universities and colleges the same fate that First Nations and Aboriginal peoples suffered in residential schools. Losing our identity, cultural values, and being forced to assimilate. Terrorized by the cultural broadcasting venues of radio, television, cultural, film, and sports enterprises, as well as the patriotic and security venues of the Army and police, all of which have become no-rights zones that are conducive for rape, assault, and sexual misconduct against women. Terrorized by the consumer society that drives Aboriginal peoples to suicide and systematically murders Aboriginal women without follow-up police investigations and justice. An increasing number of us are becoming aware of this terrorist and slave society, even more conscious of the day when all these francophone baby boomers will retire, which is imminent. Quote, Malcolm X, human rights and Afro-American rights activist, "There is no revolution where we love the enemy, where we beg the system that exploits us to integrate us." End of quote. Immigrant workers in agricultural production, industrial warehouses, call center workers, along with beneficiary attendants, nursing assistants, taxi drivers, teachers and eternal students, driving school instructors, unemployed and social workers, take what belongs to you. Your work, your courage, your determination, your salary, and your happiness. You are the ones who run their factories. Only you can produce. Without you, Quebec is nothing. Quebec without immigration is, in fact, a great disaster and an apocalypse. Immigrant workers in Quebec, start taking back what belongs to you today. Take for yourselves whatever is yours. Only you know your factories, your machines, your universities, your community associations. Don't expect a miracle organization to help you out. Time for outrage. Don't be afraid. Quote, Angel Nimamaya, just as doubt, fear is the worst hindrance to your evolution. Turn this fear into bravery. Turn doubt into certainty. Now you hold the key to success. End of quote. Make your peaceful revolution in your Immigranistans, in your workplaces. If you don't do it yourself, other technocratic usurpers or radical Islamist, Sikh, and Hindu religious followers will replace the handful of cigar smokers we now know. And if that happens, all that has been achieved would be flushed down the drain. Then we would need to start over. Only you can build a society of multiracial, multicultural, and secular integration. Secularism is non-negotiable and is not a free zone favorable only to the establishment of religions. And all races are racist, all religions are slave drivers and extremists, and transmit hatred. Have you noticed that the war on earth originated in people's belief? We say that the war of religions has caused a great harm to humanity. The report on reasonable accommodations is not the Constitution. Reasonable accommodations require reasonable claims. If it is necessary to sow the seeds of claims in the blood, corpses, graves, and cemeteries, the seed will germinate in hatred and frustration and will yield toxic fruits. Quote, Malcolm X. When religion arrives, differences happen, disputes happen, and we are no longer able to get along. End of quote. In politics, if you don't claim anything, you'll get nothing. You must claim by the means permitted by the law, no longer one by one, but by uniting until victory with all the legal, legislative, and persuasive means that you possess, and as the First Nations and Aboriginals have done. Quote, Pierre Vagier, theoretician of the Quebec Liberation Front. To be a nigger is not to be a man in America, but to be someone's slave. For the wealthy white man in America, the nigger is subhuman. Even the poor white people consider the nigger to be inferior to them. They say to work hard like a nigger, to smell bad like a nigger, to be dangerous like a nigger, to be ignorant like a nigger. White racism hides reality from them, giving them the opportunity to despise a lower man, to crush him mentally, or to take pity on him. But the poor white people who despise black people in this way are twice niggers, because they are victims of one or more alienation, racism, which, far from liberating them, imprisons them in a net of hatred or paralyzes them in the fear of one day facing black people in a civil war. For immigrant workers in Quebec are aware of their condition as niggers, exploited, and second-class citizens. End of quote. Quote, Mahatma Gandhi, spiritual leader of the Indians of India, we Indians could understand not being classified with whites, but being placed at the same level as blacks seemed too much to put up with. Black people are generally uncivilized. They are doomed. Even more, they are annoying, very dirty, and live almost like animals. The Indians would do well to avoid them. End of quote. May those across Quebec and Canada who have dared to be disdainfully treated as Restavek immigrants, monkeys, dirty blacks, wandering immigrants, and poor refugees from the Third World, vigorously engage in the intellectual debate with the executioners of freedom, social justice, and secularism, and peacefully making them utterly harmless, these filthy racists and professional robbers and scammers, bankers, businessmen, owners of temporary employment agencies, immigration officers, immigration commissioners, corrupt judges, and demagogue politicians and other anti-secular immigrants, radicalization agents, and hypocrites. Quote, Guru Nanak Dev, first guru and founding master of the Sikh religion. Before becoming Muslim, Sikh, Hindu, or Christian, let's first become human. Only fools and idiots seek to repulse others. No one is superior, and no one is inferior. End of quote. You are an immigrant worker, and you must go the whole way. You must replace, with all the positive forces of Canada, this society of slavery with a free society, functioning itself and for itself, a society that is just, secular, and open to the world, not a closed society whose members stand between themselves, indifferent to the rest of humanity, always ready to attack or defend themselves, and constrained to a fighting attitude, just as the French philosopher Henri Bergson said. Quote, Nelson Mandela, South African statesman and historical leader of the struggle against apartheid, we will work together to support courage where there is fear, to encourage negotiation where there is conflict, and to give hope where there is despair. I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to overcome it. End of quote. Your struggle can only be legally and peacefully victorious. We do not hold immigrants who are awake for long in misery and contempt. The silence of immigrants is only the truce of the vanquished, for whom complaint constitutes a crime. Wait till they wake up. Having been faced by secular immigrants in Quebec, you invented the theory of the law of force, violence, and terrorism. Be sure that the secular immigrants have adopted it. At the first opportunity, they will break the invisible chains that keep them in slavery, unemployment, and fear for such a banal motive, and they will take back by force of law what the law of force has stolen from them. Long live Kebec-Immigranistan! Long live the Kebec-Immigranistan Liberation Front! Long live a secular Canada and Quebec! For democratic and national security reasons, which are evident from the developments of recent years, and to save, if possible, the secularity and religious neutrality of the state, we have read the manifesto of the Kebec-Immigranistan Liberation Front in its entirety.